Going live. All right, we're live on air. Okay, so welcome guys. Good to see everybody. I mentioned on Monday that this week was going to be really lab heavy. Today is the big day. So Monday was like we did a little lab, and today is like the big lab where we really kind of solidify all the lessons we've learned so far, and maybe find out a few more on our own, and build a whole web page from scratch. And that's really the only objective tonight is to do that. First things first. Agenda. Well, I'm going to go through the layout challenge that we did last time. I'm not going to go through every one in gruesome detail. The solutions are posted in the repository if you want to look at them, and I'll show you a link to that. Oh, by the way, I also posted the link to the slides and general channel on Slack so that you can follow along. But I am going to go through like a general plan of attack when you see a layout and how you might go about turning it into HTML and CSS. And we'll look at maybe two of the layout challenges briefly and talk about those. And we'll do a little bit of review and maybe talk about the homework if people have any lingering questions from homework. And then a big lab, and I'll talk more about that when we get there. And then finally, if there's time and we have an interest, I'm going to talk a little bit about grid frameworks. And don't worry about what that means. And we're not actually going to be using them tonight, but we will be later on in the class when we start talking about responsive design for websites. And so when we get to that chapter, we're really going to dive into these sort of things. So as a primer, if we have time, I'll start talking about them and how they relate to layout, like we've been talking this week. And then finally, we'll talk about the assignment for this weekend. Okay, this being my class, I've got to do a little bit about space. So Commander Scott Kelly came home last night. Does anybody know who Scott Kelly is? Yeah, so he was the commander of the International Space Station. He was on the International Space Station for 340 days, just under a year, which is the longest that any American has ever been in space. Which is, really awesome. He's also a twin, and part of the reason they sent him instead of somebody else for this year-long mission is because they want to observe how his body changed over the course of that year in space. And since he has a twin, he's a really good candidate for that sort of comparison. And one thing they've let loose already is he grew 2 inches while in space, which may not sound super obvious why that happens, and I can't explain it either, but. So there's going to be all kinds of cool stuff like that. So they're going to be studying his health for like over a year, probably, just looking at how his body responded to being in space. All in preparation to go to Mars, probably in like 10 years or so. So not related to this class, but it's fun. Okay, so the layout challenge. We did this last week, and I just wanted to talk about it a bit. We started last week. We worked on it last class. And I wanted to talk about both like a general plan of attack and then some specifics as far as like how we actually implement this. Okay, so actually, let me do this. There's usually a remote for this screen. I want to make the screen. Oh, here it is. Thank you. Where do I point it? There we go. All right. So give me just a second here to let this go up. All right. So I'll start talking about this. When I look at this, what I'm doing in my head is drawing boxes. I've kind of said that several times. Like when we look at layouts, we need to start drawing boxes around things to see where we're going to make different HTML, okay? And so, this one is a good use case. So the first thing we notice here at the top is just like a normal block element, right? So we can just draw a box over that, right? That's a normal block element. It's filling its tire width like they do normally, and we know how this works, right? So there's nothing special about this one, so this is probably just our header, right, or something of that nature. The next thing I want to do is I want to look for any row of elements. I want to draw a box around that row of elements, okay? So here is clearly a row of 2 elements. Does everybody see that? 2 elements side by side, 2 blocks side by side. We might call that a row. And I'm going to draw a box around that row. And this box, as a rule, will probably be something like a div with a class clearfix. Okay? And the reason for this, right, is because we know that these 2 boxes that are in this row are going to be floated, correct? And we want to make sure that things that come after them are in the proper place and that they're contained within their parent. So we're just going to wrap them in this clearfix thing, and that ensures that this row will be self-contained, okay? So that's just our general plan of attack. We're going to draw a box around the row and make that box a div with a class clearfix. And then, these guys can be, we'll just call these articles or something. We don't really know what they are, but for the purpose of this, we'll just call these guys articles. And what are we going to do to each of these in our CSS?
Float them.
Yeah, we're going to float them. And what does floating do to a block element? Generally speaking, how does floating change a block element? So we know that block elements fill their entire width, right? That's how they operate. They go 100% width, and they don't let anybody next to them. So how does floating change a block element?
Makes it the width of whatever you define it.
Right. So it no longer is going to be 100% width, right? It's going to be whatever width you tell it to, and it's going to play nicely with others and let others sit next to it, right? So floating, puts it off to one side, yes, but it also allows a block element to have things next to it, right? That's really the key here. And so we're going to float this left. We're going to do the same with this. And, like we said, when we float something, we absolutely have to give it a width, okay? We have to give it a width, or it's not going to know how big to be. It just won't, and it's going to collapse in on itself probably. And so, these are both taking up half of this row. Everybody see that? This one's first half, this one's the second half. So we're going to give them a width of 50%, 1/2 of the row. Cool. All right, so we've got our first row. What do we see here? Yeah, it's another row. There's 3 things that are right next to each other. And we know, when we see that, we're going to draw a box around it. And that box is going to be, guess what? A div with the class clearfix. Okay? And we do that so that these things being floated will be contained within their parent, right? And so this is our div here, and then maybe these are sections. Apologize to people on Hangouts who can't see my beautiful drawings, but maybe I'll snap a photo when I'm done. Okay, so we've got these 3 sections, and likewise, right, we're just going to float each of these guys left. Etc. Okay. So now that they're all floated left, we have to do the next step, which is give them a width, right? And what width are we going to give them?
33, 23.
Right. I saw some people struggle. Yeah.
So I wonder if it's possible to use fractions here.
It's not possible in percentages. there like maybe some very edge CSS features that allow you to do something called calc, where you can do math. But that's not supported in many browsers at all. So I wouldn't worry about that. So stick to percentages. And if you need to pull out a calculator to do that, that's okay. And yeah, some people put 33% and they noticed something, which is it didn't take up the full row, right? It was a little bit off, and that's because that adds up to 99. So yes, percentages can be decimals, right? So we can have a width of 33.333%, something of that nature, right? And we would repeat that across.
For the two rows where they have kind of like space in between, if you wanted to stylistically kind of like if they were columns and you did it like less than 100%, would it automatically pick the remaining space? Could you have it so put that space in between the boxes so they're kind of spread out from each other? It would autofill that space.
So you're asking about this space here?
And the other one's below it,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Now, typically how we do this is we would have, there's several approaches, but how we might do this is we might have, boxes around these things that have padding, and then these are boxes inside of those boxes. Okay, because if you start adding margin, right, which is what this might be, then you're going to have trouble because margin, remember, is not included in width. Okay, and so it's going to be very difficult to do math having pixel margins and percentage widths. Even if border, because remember, border box only includes content, padding, and border. It does not include margin because margin's outside of the box. And so what you probably want to do is just have maybe my article is this whole box, and then within that I have another box and the article itself has some padding. Okay. You kind of have to play around with that to get a feel for it. Is that what you guys would say back there? Yeah. Cool. Okay, so now we've got our sections, and then finally, this is just the block element, right? It's going all the way, it's filling its entire width, and we don't have to worry about that. And because we put these guys in divs with clearfix, right, we know this footer will be in the right place. If we hadn't clearfixed this div, what would have happened? Anybody want to tell me? Or anybody know? Yeah, which element would collapse?
The parent of the quotes.
Exactly, which is? Exactly, the div itself would collapse, the row basically would collapse, right? And this footer would move up here. And now all of a sudden our layout looks super weird. Okay, so if we use this approach, we don't have to put a lot of thought into like what's collapsing, what's not. A row is a div with the class clearfix, and everything inside of it is floated and given a width percentage. Okay, I'm going to snap a photo of this for people that are watching. Okay, and I'll Slack that when we have a minute. All right, so let's take a look at another one, and then we'll do the other one, and then we'll actually spend a few seconds talking about how they actually implement. Do what? Yes, that's the one I was going to do, the hardest one. Yeah. Yeah, and I know this is probably the one that people struggled with, if they did struggle. So I'm going to talk about this one a little bit. Okay. All right, so far we've been talking about layouts where each row takes up the whole width of the page, right? Okay, so this one, things start to change a little bit. We've got a whole bunch of chaos happening here. And the same model is going to have to adjust a bit. All right, so first things first, we see some elements here. Okay? what should we do with all those things kind of lined up like that?
So you put them all like in a header.
Yeah, we should draw a box around them, right? Okay, just like we have been. Okay, and before when we drew that box around things, we've been doing div with clearfix. In this case, this is clearly sort of like the header of the page. So maybe we use the actual header tag. We say, it's a header with the class clearfix. Okay. Now, we could treat each of these as if they were their own thing. Or we could sort of subdivide this up into even smaller grids, okay? So imagine this. I draw one box here, and then I draw a second box here. Everybody see that? So this box, I'm going to float left. And give what width? Like a guess.
25%.
Yeah, like 25% probably. Somewhere around there. Now this box, I'm going to float left as well. And what width am I going to give it? Yeah, 75%. Okay, does everybody see that? So we're kind of, yeah.
Sorry, is there ever a time where you would flip right?
There may be times, right? And for instance, we could float this one right, and it would have the same effect in this situation. The reason that I'm floating things left is because when you start working with actual CSS frameworks that do layout, they typically float everything left, and that's just sort of the way it is. If you use floating for that original intended purpose, right, where you sort of take something like an image and float it to one side or the other so that the text can flow around it. In that case, there's an obvious reason why you float right. Like if you want your image on the right side of your article and the text to flow around it, in that case, it would make a lot of sense to float something right. And for layouts, I personally just like everything floating the same direction. It keeps me sane in most cases. Okay, so now, we've got each of these boxes, right? Essentially, and there are 5 of them, and we want them to take up this whole container collectively, correct? So if we zoom in on just this box, and we say just this box here is 100%, right? Each of these things could be floated left themselves and given a percentage, what width? 20%, exactly. Does everybody see what I did there? So we're taking the problem and we're breaking it into smaller sections, right? Yes.
Would that then cover the entire?
Yeah, I'm simplifying the problem a bit. Yeah, good point. I'm simplifying the problem a bit and assuming these are taking up this full 75%. Which maybe in the future not something we want to do exactly, but in this case, it's fine for this phase problem. So yeah, good question. So this is 20% of what? It's 20% of this thing, its parent, right? So, we could maybe this thing on the right is a nav. And each of these things is maybe like an anchor tag, or sometimes you'll see navigations as unordered lists and list items. And so maybe this is a list item. Okay.
So how would the HTML?
We'll look at that. We'll look at that. Yeah, we'll look at that. I just want to, first break down the problem. Okay. So now it gets a little more interesting, right? What do we see now? What's here? Where should I draw my next row? Maybe somebody who's very courageous, I'd like you to draw the next row. Or just take a stab at it. Come on, take one for the team.
Cold call, good.
I don't do that. Yeah, please.
I had somebody else, I had Eric help me with this, I feel like
Well, that's okay. Maybe Eric had different advice than I had. Yeah. Exactly. Right? Thank you. Well done. Thank you. Great. So yeah, exactly. This whole thing in itself is a row. You see that? Now, if I was to draw a divider down this, where would I draw it? If I'm saying, where are my cells in this row, or my columns in this row? Yeah, right here?
Yep.
Exactly. So there's my row. It has basically two columns, this thing and this thing. Okay, so we're just chunking this thing down into smaller pieces, okay? And this one, so first of all, this is a row, right? So that we're going to draw a div around it. We give it a class clear fix. Okay? That's the first thing we're going to do. Now, this one, we're going to float left. And maybe this is another nav, maybe this is a side navigation or something where we have links to other things in that page. Or something like that. Float left, and we're going to give it a width of, what do we think? Now, if this is 25%, then, maybe this is a little bit less than that. Like 20%? Sure. And this whole thing, right, is itself a column, right? So we're going to give it a float left. And we're going to give it the remaining width, which is 80%, 100 minus 20. Okay, so we've drawn a big box around this whole row, and then we've drawn two smaller boxes for each of the columns there, basically. Everybody see that? Anybody have a question about how I got there? Yeah.
I got a question about, so we have now fields containing fields.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. Yeah, good point. We do. We have floats containing floats, right? We can think about this problem as zooming in right here, and this is another layout, right? Okay, and then we could sort of just ignore everything around it and act as if this were on its own. Does everybody understand that? So we're kind of dividing this problem down into smaller and smaller pieces until finally it's something that we recognize. So now we've just got this little piece, and now all of a sudden this is something we know, right? This is maybe a header. We can have multiple headers on a page. Maybe this is the header of an article. And then now we've got something here, two things side by side. And so these will have to have a box around them. Oops. And that box will have to be, a div, class clear fix. Bring the turtles all the way down. Right? And so this is going to float left. And it's probably going to have a width of, maybe 75%. So 75% of this row, right? And this guy will float left. And it will have a width, the remaining width, 25%. See that? And then finally, we just got one more hard part, and that's, drawing one more. We've seen this problem before. One more box. This is another row. And we know that's a div with a class of clearfix. And each of these things is what? I think you do now.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm not concerned about the tag. What properties are we gonna give that?
Oh, in terms of CSS,
Yeah,
float them all left.
we're gonna float them all left, and what
25.
25%, right? Because they each take up 25% of their row. So we'll float these guys left, and we'll give them a width 25%. Right? And we'll do the same over there. Okay, and then finally a footer, right? And that is just a block element, so it's all good to go. All right, we're gonna dive into just coding this up really quickly. Any questions before we do that? Okay. All right, I'm gonna move this down. Oh, actually, let me snap up here. Oh, I gotta be quick. Race against the clock. Sorry, it's too late. Just wait till it. There you go. Okay, so this is going to inch along. So while it does that, I'm going to get my text editor out. So you'll notice mine looks a little different than yours now. I changed to a white background because the contrast was a little weird on this projector with black background. And just so you know, if you're interested in changing your theme, you can go up to the Sublime text up in the upper left-hand corner, preferences, color scheme, and then in there's a bunch of different color schemes.
Wow, really cool names too.
Yeah, but don't get too hung up on that because we have work to do. All right. So let's take another look here, right? So there's our magazine. Okay. We know now where the boxes are. So I'm going to just do the HTML first because that's the way I like to do these things. So I've put a container around all of this. And the reason we did that, remember, was so we could kind of squeeze and center everything. We don't have to do that for this assignment, but I decided to go ahead and do it. So we talked about that first row being a header itself, maybe. And remember, because that first row has floated elements in it, we're just going to go ahead and give it a clear fix and have that out of the way. Okay? And then in that top row, we had two columns, right? One on the left for where the logo might go, and then one on the right where we had our sort of navigational buttons, probably. So we're going to give this row two children, which are going to be our two columns. The first one, I'm just going to make an H1. Remember, an H1 itself is a block element. Okay, so it can be floated left and put into our layout just like any other element. And I'm going to give, I'm going to say this is space mag. And then my second column is going to be another box, right? Another block element that will float eventually. And in this case, that one's probably a nav because, we have navigational elements in there. Oops. Okay, so everybody see how this is shaping up so far? I'll let you type. So this is our first row here. And within that are two columns. Okay? We're not super worried about styling those yet. We're just going to do it as we go. Now, I just want to show you this because this is a common way that navigations are implemented, is using a UL, which can somebody remind me what that tag means? Chris, do you remember what that tag means? Yeah, exactly. It's an unordered list. This is a common way that navigational links are implemented here. So we'll go ahead and do that. And, this will be like maybe home. And we'll have another one, another list item that's about, oh, I put on caps lock. No good. And then we'll do another list item that's archive, I don't know. I think there are 5 of them, right? So help, and we'll say contact. Okay, so now we've got something more interesting. Here's column 1, here's column 2. And then inside of this column, we have column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this column itself becomes a row, and we have the 5 items in there. Okay? Now, you'll notice, right, this nav is also a parent to floats. Correct? And so, we might put clearfix on there. So we can do that. Actually, we'll probably put it here because this is the direct parent to clearfix. And just to be safe, we know that this thing has floated children, so we'll go ahead and do that. Not going to hurt anything. Yeah. It should already be in, if you sank class 5, it was in class 5's code. It's just a PDF and like a empty HTML and CSS template. Thank you. Okay, so we've got column 1 and column 2, and then in there we've got another row, column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that row. All right, so we're good with the header. So just to show that this is a new row, I'm going to go ahead and space down. Let's take a look at the layout again. So remember, the next thing we got is another big row here. And for this one, we're just going to do the normal approach, which is a div with a class clearfix. I always like to close my tags as soon as I open them because it helps me remember not to forget. Or remember not to forget. That's a weird thing to say. All right, so that's our row 2, right? In our big picture, that's the second row. And our first column, remember, I said could maybe be a side navigation. So we'll just go ahead and make that another nav item. We'll just put a little H3 in here and say some links. I like to put in some content into my things just so I can sort of visualize, what's going on. So the nav is that first big column, the big side column, okay? And then there's another big box on the right side. If we reference back here. I should keep this one open. There's this other big box on the right side, right? So, that box contains a lot of things. There may not be a really great semantic way to describe all of those things. So for right now, I'm just going to make that a div itself. Just like sort of a generic container for some other things.
You wouldn't have to use main.
We could use main, totally. We could use main. We could say, like, this is the main content. In fact, why don't we just do that? Remember, main tag, we only want to use once per page. So we have to be very certain that this is the most important part of the page. And it probably is. So we'll just do that. Okay. So remember that main, we're just going to zoom in and treat that whole main like as if it's its own new layout. And let's see what that layout looks like. That layout has 3 rows, essentially. One there, one there, one there. Okay, so let's make those rows. Well, the first one looks like maybe another header. Like maybe this is the header section of our article or whatever is going to go in here. And the second row, well, it has two things in it. And so we're just going to make that another div. And remember I said, that div is, has two floated children. Oops, this should really stay there. Has two floated children, right? So because those things are floated, we've got to give it a class clearfix. So it'll make sure to contain those children. And then we're going to do one more div for the third row. And likewise, it has floated children. So we're going to give it a class clearfix as well. Okay, so now we've got our 3 rows in there. So in the header, I'm just going to add a little H2 so we can see what's going on. It'll be like, my article. The second one, we have 2 things. One that's taking up most of the width, and the second one's like it's a little bit smaller. So I'm going to make the first column in this row an article. And I'm going to make the second one an aside. Space these out just so you can see the 3 rows there. And then finally, in the last one, remember we have those 4 little boxes of somewhat equal importance. So I'm just going to make those all sections. And I'm going to say section 1. Maybe these are like my recommended articles. I've been reading this one, and these are the sort of the next up articles. All right, so I've got the first row here, which is like another header, a second row here, which has our article and an aside, and then our last row, which has 4 sections in it. Okay, we're almost done. If we take a look, we've got one more thing, one more big row. Oops. There it is. This was the first big row, right? This was the second big row. And the last big row is easy. It's just a block element. It takes up its whole width, doesn't got anything fancy in it. And so we can just make it, say, a footer. And I'm going to put a small copyright in here. Okay. So there's row 3, row 2, 2. Oh, this is actually in the wrong place, isn't it? This is row 3. This div here that has a side nav and a main is row 2. And then finally up top, the header was row 1. Okay? Now if I open this in the browser, you'll see nothing. Why is that? Because I didn't save, that's why. It's always a good thing to do. Okay, so we've got some of those base styles there, just showing where the boxes are, but we haven't done any of the layout yet. So, we know that an H1 is a block element, so it's going to take up its whole width. The nav is a block element; it's going to take up its whole width. This is the side nav there, so everything's just sort of next to each other, and it doesn't, we can't quite have the layout yet. So that's the next step. Okay, and actually I'm going to put something in this so we can see this. My article. And this will be like an ad or something. I just put some content in the article and aside so we could see where those were. All right, so let's start styling these things. Anybody have any questions so far? If you don't get all this, it's okay. I'm going to post the solution. You'll have plenty of time to look through it. So if you're getting behind, it may be more beneficial to sort of watch than try to catch up. Okay. So the first thing we want to do, we know this header is a row, so let's take a look at that. Well, we drew those first boxes. We said the first column was going to be about 25%, right? And the second column was going to be the rest, 75%. So let's go ahead and do that. The first column we see is an H1, and the second column is a nav. So I'm going to go to the layout section. And I'm going to, float my first column left. And I'm going to give it a width of 25%. So the first column we said was that H1, that logo or something, title of my company, title of my magazine, whatever it is. And then the second column was that nav. So we're going to float that thing left, and we're going to give it the remainder of that column, which is 75%. I mean, of that row, sorry. Yes, question.
Is it a problem that there's two navs?
It will be a problem. How are we going to solve it? Yeah, we'll get there. And normally, this is an example of how we do, set up a layout in the simplest terms. Normally, we probably would want to use classes for these things rather than doing it on the tags, right? Because this is not semantically related to a nav at all. And so styling the tag itself doesn't really make a lot of sense as a best practice, but it just makes it easier for us for demonstration purposes. That's a good point. All right, so now let's take a look at that. Okay, it's getting a little closer. This is on the left side, and we've got this other nav box on the right side. But these LIs, remember, LIs themselves, list items, are block items. So block elements. So each of those are taking up their full width. We don't want that. We want them to sit next to each other nicely and take up only 20% of the row. So we'll do that next. We're going to style these list items. We're going to float each of them left. And like we said in our drawing, we're going to give them each a fifth, 1/5, because there's 5 of them, of their row, which is 20%. So far, so good? So let's take another look. All right, cool. Now that's starting to look like something. Now we could do some more CSS to get rid of those bullets and maybe make the font bigger and stuff, make it look nicer. And probably we get rid of these borders in like a real web page. But just so we can see where all of the boxes are laying out, I'm leaving the borders. And I'm not worried about the bullets right now. But what we do notice is things are starting to get funky down here. For one, this side nav, our second nav, is now all kooky. Okay, so back in our PDF, right, this side nav was the first column in our big box, in our biggest box. It was taking what we said 20%. And then this main was like the rest, a big thing drawn around the rest of this stuff was a column of 80%. So we'll go ahead and do those things. But we've already styled the nav tag. So like was said, we can just put a class on here and call it side nav. And if we style this class, why will it win against the nav tag style?
It's more specific.
Yeah, exactly. Classes are more specific than tag styles. And so the more specific rule is going to win in this case. Okay. So we said our first column there is our side nav. And we'll float it left. Give it the width we talked about, which was 20%. And our second column in that big box was a main tag. We're also going to float that left. And we're going to give it the remaining width in that row, which is 80%. Actually, maybe I could split these out by rows there. Okay. Let's go back to the browser. Okay. That looks pretty good. Now, the height here is kind of weird because there's not much content in here yet. And we've given these like backgrounds that are different than the white background, so we can tell where the bottom of those boxes are. In a real layout, we probably wouldn't do that, right? They would have, if this had a white background and no border, we wouldn't be able to tell that it's only this tall. It would just kind of look all right. But, we're getting closer to that picture. We've got this box on the left and this big box on the right. And now these things we've got to work on as if they were their own layout. And what we notice about this box, which is our header inside of that main, is that this one's already cool. Like it's just a block element and it's taking up its entire width and it's already good to go. If we look at, just refresh our memory, we look at that PDF again. We can see, it's pretty much doing what it's supposed to. So the next thing we've got to work on is this row here, which is our article and our aside. This one and this one. Okay, so let's go back to Sublime. We've got an article and our side. Okay, well, we said the article, again, because it's sitting next to things, has to float left. And we said it took about 75% of its row. It's a little bigger than the aside. So the side is just going to take up the rest of that. Oh, sorry, that was a bit quick. Right, so the article is taking up 75%, and the side's taking up the remaining 25% of that row. When we go back to the browser, and there we go. Again, we're not super worried about the heights because we're not going to be showing all of these borders in a real layout. So the last thing we have to do is just these sections. Yes, question.
So those heights are default. Or
Yeah, why are they that tall? Is that your question?
Why they are different? So, the article, the aside have words.
Yes. No, that's a great question. Does anybody know why this one's taller than this one? Let's look at the HTML again. This is the article and this is the aside. Does anybody know why this one, the aside, is taller than the article?
Just because of the edge height.
Exactly. Right. So by default, headings, H1 through however many, have some margin by default. And so because it has that margin, it's expanding that height. But every box that we've seen on this page, the height is only reflecting the content inside of it. We haven't defined any heights, and that's sort of best practice because we want to let the content define the height of the page, not give it explicit heights. Question? Okay, cool. Everybody feeling okay so far? All right, so let's do that last row, which is our sections. And those guys want to sit next to each other, so we'll float them. Oops. Float them left. And there's 4 of them, so 100 divided by 4 is 25%. I just noticed those don't have a border because they're not included up here. So I'm going to go ahead and add section to that list of things that gets a border. Okay, so now finally, if we go over here and refresh, we've got our 4 sections there at the bottom. Now we've got our magazine layout and we're ready to go. So this one down here looks like you have an extra block element of some sort, essentially. And then the other ones could just be in your CSS. You might have more things in that list of things that have borders. All right, so any more questions? If this isn't super clear, we have a lab that's going to take up a lot of the class today, and you can ask about it during that time period. If you still haven't if this isn't clicking quite yet. Okay. So we spent a bit of time on that. So let's quickly do a little bit of review. I opened up a lot of those. And then we will just get right into the lab, and that'll take us through the rest of the class. Okay, so some quick review. Things we talked about last class, we talked about 2 problems that have the word collapse in them. So you have to remember the difference between these 2 things, but they both have that word collapse in them, so don't confuse them. First one was collapsing parents, right? And this is what we were talking about when we did our layout. And this is the notion that when a block element has all floated children, like a row would, right? It's going to collapse in on itself unless we do something about that, unless we remedy that somehow. So all of our divs are rows, and those rows had floated elements in them only. And so if we hadn't added something to them, they would have collapsed in on themselves, and our layout, especially that magazine layout, would have gotten super funky super fast. Okay, and so there are 2 ways we learned. Well, there's 3 ways, but there's 2 that we should remember. That we can fix this. And one is using this overflow auto property, which is just a CSS property that tells something, its main goal is to tell something how to treat content that leaks out of its container, but it can be used here as a trick to get a container to contain all of its floating children. And sort of the preferred way, which is this clearfix class, which we had been using in all the examples. So it's good to know that this exists, because you'll see it a lot in practice. But generally, this is sufficient and easier to implement. Okay, so collapsing parents, and then just a reminder of what those look like. So here we have a main, which is a block element, and it has 2 floated children, and it's collapsed in on itself. Okay, and we can fix that by either giving that main overflow auto property in CSS, or we can just give that main the clearfix class, and it's going to behave like we expect it to. Okay, so that's a little bit of a review of this, and just this is the clearfix thing. This goes at the top of your style sheet in your little utility section, and then you can use it anywhere on the page. You don't have to worry about it ever again. Okay, and the other thing we mentioned briefly was collapsing margins, okay? And so this is something that happens in CSS when a child is touching the top or a side of its parent, its margin will collapse into its parent and leak out, okay? And this can be the case, a cause for many a headache when you're trying to figure out why things are pushed away from each other when you haven't given them any margin. So to explain what that means, let's take a look once more times at these diagrams, and then I'll show you in practice what that looks like. Okay, so here we've got a header and an article, right? Both block elements. We haven't done anything fancy with layout, right? They're both just taking up their entire width. And they both have margin 0, no margin. Does anybody remember what margin's purpose is? Yeah, exactly. Padding, remember, is to create space within the box, within, so the text isn't brushing up against the border. Margin is to create space between boxes, right, between neighbors. So if we wanted some space between this header and this article, we might add some margin bottom on this header, and it could push this down a little bit. Does everybody see that? Okay, but we haven't done that. We've given them both margin 0. What do you notice about this 0? Just thought I'd point this out. Notice there's no units on there. You don't have to put units if it's 0, because 0 is 0 is 0 no matter what the units. So no need to add the extra px or percentage sign. 0 is 0 is 0. Just thought I'd point that out because you'll see that sometimes. All right, so now we're going to add something in there. We add an H2. Remember, by default, headings have margin. Okay. And all of a sudden, we see like the space creep up in here. And now these two things are apart from each other when those two things still have margin 0. And so this can be very confusing. But what's happened is that H2's margin is leaking out of its parent and it's pushing up against that header. So the H2's margin has collapsed into the parent's margin, and the sum of them, which is 10, is now in between those things.
So that's a default setting that could be overridden and the rest of normalize?
So yes, so H2s have margin by default in a browser. You could get rid of margin on heading if you wanted with a reset style sheet. Now normalize won't get rid of it, right? It'll standardize it across browsers, but it won't get rid of it. A reset would get rid of the margin. That's not necessarily what you want to do. We do want margin on our headings generally, right? Like if it's a big title, we want to create some space around it and make have it nice and readable. And so this is it's perfectly legitimate to have margin on this thing. The issue here is we haven't controlled for the margin leaking out of the parent. And so the way that we control for that is just we can add an overflow auto on its parent, and that will force the margin to come inside of its parent and uncollapse it from its parent's margin. It's not really important to understand the mechanics here. The important part is, you're going to see this. This is going to come up, and when you can't understand why there's space between two elements, remember this and remember the solution, because it'll drive you a bit crazy. Okay, so now let's quickly take a look. Don't worry about doing this. I just want to show you what this looks like. All right, so I'm way zoomed in here. So what we have here is a main, or a header and a main tag, right? And both of those things have no margin. And then inside of them is an H1 and an H2 respectively, okay? And those things by default have some margin. So what we're seeing here is this H1's margin is leaking out and pushing against the top there. And this H2's margin is leaking out and pushing against the bottom of the header. But we want those things right up next to each other, okay? So first of all, let's look at this in the Chrome DevTools. I'm going to inspect. This is why this can be extremely frustrating. If I hover over this header, it's just showing me what I expected, where I expect it to be. It's not showing any margin or anything up here or down here. So it's very confusing for me because I don't know what's in that space, right? If I hover over that, I hover over that, but nothing's in that space. So I don't understand why they're doing this. And this can, like, this is literally, I've spent hours on this problem before, and then I just, like, did one of those. But if we notice, we go in here and hover over H1, and all of a sudden we can see there's a bunch of margin leaking out of the parent. And it happens to be leaking out of the top and the bottom in the case of the H1. Okay, and so we talked about the solution. All we have to do is on this header, add overflow auto. Oops. And now it's gotten rid of that. Now what we're seeing here is that body has padding by default, and so that's why it's not right up against the top of here. Reset and normalize will get rid of that padding for you. But that's a different thing. Now our header is happy. The margin is all inside of the header. And so if we do the same thing to the main, we add overflow auto, and now they're touching and we're happy. Okay. On the first homework, I saw some people had these little spaces in between each of their sections, and they had no idea what was in that space. This is what that problem was. You had some sort of heading at the top that had margin and was leaking out into its parent. Okay, so know what that looks like, and now we know how to solve it. All right, so lab time. Everybody, we're going to open. We didn't do the sync at the beginning of this class, you might have noticed. So let's do that now. Let's get the GitHub desktop app open. We're going to get this set up, and then you can go take a break because it's been a little over an hour, and then come back and start working on it. So we'll go to FEWD22. Up in the right-hand corner, sync, and pull down the latest changes. Once you've done that, right-click on it, open in Finder. We're in week 4, class 7, starter code. See a folder in there called Startup Matchmaker. We're just going to copy that folder. Actually, just copy the whole starter code folder. That's what we usually do. I don't want to change things. Okay. Well, we can talk about that in a minute. What that means is you are changing something in the class repository instead of changing it in your named repository. So we've copied this starter code. Now I'm going to go up to my named repository, Jacob's Feud. I'm going to make a new folder, class 7. And I'm going to paste those starter code in there. All right, so what we'll notice is there's very little in here. All we've got is this image, basically. All right, so this is Startup Matchmaker's mock. This is what they want you to create. They haven't given you, like the previous homework did, any design specification. So it's going to be sort of up to you to kind of make it look as close to this as you can. All right. So this is what we're going to be spending basically the most of the rest of the class on, is trying to take everything that we've learned and create this website, which, this is a not bad looking website, right? Knowing that you could have done this after 4 weeks in this class, might have surprised you at the beginning. Yeah.
Does it say taste after brains?
It does.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those trendy companies. You know, we thought they'd be funny.
Trendy, all right.
Okay, so all we have is this mock, and then in images, they've given us this background co-working image that we can use on the page. Okay, and so in here, we're gonna have to create all the files, all the folders, all of the HTML, and all of the CSS to make this website come to life. And myself and the TAs will be, you know, circulating as, you know, you're working on this, but try to do as much of it as you can on your own, and, you know, we'll help you when you get really stuck. Okay, so feel free to take a break before diving into this, and then, you know, we'll start working on it. Yeah.
So, there's section over here, but this is 2%.
Do you like your things in
When I was working on
Well, that looks like a whole page.
I just forgot to. This matters.
Oh, no. Yeah, I was on 6.
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Ooh, 15%.
Yeah, and so you see, look, this says style CSS, line 96. Let's see how it's overriding. So remember, these two equal specificity. This one comes later, so this one comes.
I just didn't even see that. I must have just had the CSS.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
No, it's quiet. Oh, you were? Awesome.
Okay. So we can start looking at.
Oh, where'd you go?
I always like to start in the browser.
Oh.
And just inspecting elements and looking
No,
to see what's going
Oh,
on.
I thought you said live.
So one obvious thing is like
Everyone's like live the page.
this nav, right? Should be floated at 75%.
So they live there, we live there.
Because this is the side nav. This is that long box. It should be on the left. So let's right click. Let's use this thing.
We live there.
This thing here. In the upper. Yeah. If you click,
It's changed a lot.
yeah, this one.
Yeah,
here.
it's changed.
Yeah, click on it. Do you have the PDF? Okay. No, that's okay. It's this one. So that's the side map. So what's happening is it's getting the style for this because they're both navs. So we had to put a class on this and style that class. And you can see that we don't have that class. Exactly. So that's the first column in that row. So we'll just give it a class like side map or something. Sure. We can name it whatever we want. So we in this class name we added a dash. So here we've got to make sure it's exactly the same. Getting there. Okay, so now here's what I'm seeing. These sections are supposed to be in here, but they're not. So I'm thinking we either closed this too soon, used a close tag too soon, or we forgot a close tag somewhere, or something like that. So I'm guessing mismatch tags, that's what I'm guessing. So if we go back into the HTML, the header, remember, is that first row inside of the main. Then we have this div. So actually, the article on the side should be inside of that div. So that div is the second row. So we just highlight the article on the side. All of them. So we want these things inside of this div, because this div is the second row. Yeah, and remember, okay, so a couple of rules when doing indentation, right? If something's a child of something else, indent it that way. Right? So this article is a child of the div, so it should be indented more after the div. The second rule is the opening and closing tag should be on the same level of the page. So the article is good, because those are on the same level. The next rule is things that are siblings should be on the same level of indentation. So this article and this side are siblings, so they should be on the same level of indentation. Right, because the article and the side, both of them have this div as a parent. So we want to take that out. Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so now we have that second row. Now the problem here is totally. It's gonna look mostly the same because we haven't changed too much yet. Now remember, this whole big box is the main. Okay, so these sections should be inside of that main. Yeah, so that's the third row there. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And directly after that, second row. Yep, this whole div is the second row. And now we want to add the third row. Yep, we'll have to adjust the indentation.
And it should be the same, because it's the same, they're siblings.
Exactly, because the three rows are siblings. Now, before you do the so if you highlight line 39 all the way down to line 51, that stuff you just pasted, now hit tab. So now, now something else I'm missing. Where do we close that meeting? Now remember, the opening tag and the closing tag should be at the same level for this reason, so we can easily scan down that line and see where it is. But you'll notice it's not there. Yeah. So we have that one there, but now we have these two like closing div tags that are not closing. Lines up with this bit, that looks good. Okay. Exactly. So that's the second big row, right? So the side nav and that. That's active.
Yeah.
And then finally below that we have the footer, which is that bottom box. Now before we go, remember this footer is a sibling of that middle box, right? Exactly.
Oh, I see.
Beautiful. So that remember I was talking about like the height and width. It's just not exactly. Now one thing is these sections aren't taking up the whole header yet, so
Is under start to 180 here?
it's a pretty simple mistake you fix if your CSS. So look at the aside and then look at the section. It's one character difference. Without you. Yeah. There it is. Looks great. Cool.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, now it's insane. So.
And then we would take a new red folder.
I'm gonna leave this up for reference.
What you can actually do is you can just say group file here.
Oh, one thing I didn't mention, and I want to just say this. Remember our general plan of attack, right? First write the HTML, and then write the CSS. Okay. So first look at this. Maybe even draw some boxes, yourself on the table if you want. Come grab a marker if that will help you. And then you're going to want to start writing the HTML. And once you have all of that markup done, that's when you can go in CSS and start making it look like this. Okay?
So this is the same exact thing. Oh, it's not. This is under.
Oh, I see, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So this is gonna be.
Yeah. It's just more of a convention. Yeah,
So, okay, one thing I'm noticing, it looks like you made the index actually on a folder instead of a file.
Yes.
That's it. But, so you have to, this sidebar is always so helpful. If you need to do anything that complicated, you'll have to go to the files. Look at the files themselves. Actually, this is, do that one more time. Or this first.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I would want to make
You're
it.
very top many chairs.
Let's make it. I recommend that.
I wouldn't recommend, like, you can make your folders in here, but they can files themselves.
So just the.
And then looking at, start matching with your folder itself. Okay. Looking at open it again, you can see. Yeah, make it inside of the start actually. Probably best. Actually, I just close this and drag the start of watchmaker folder instead of starter because you're adding a extra folder.
So wait.
Instead of starter. And then right click that top button. And then if you do index now, this file is then you can say index.
And then also.
Yeah, I mean, you can do CSS now, or you can wait until you're ready to start stop. I think that may be a better approach. Yeah, because, first thing is first, you want to write automation.
This way,
You can have your CSS when you're ready to start stop.
if you wanted to have maybe, so that kind of said like, make it only be X, Y. If you
Correct, so, yeah,
like,
CSS is a
in a
folder for
box
all
that
your
had
stuff.
everything here to maybe have a
Or
different
some people call that folder styles.
on the outside
The
of
name
it.
can vary,
Then
then
you might need to
CSS
have
or
a
styles,
two
and
boxes.
folder
You have
inside that
the
is a
inner
style
container,
that's
you have
CSS.
background of say
Or some people
black,
call it
and then
name
body with
CSS.
background of white, so it's kind of like white bars on either side. But right, now, if you're gonna just have the same background uniform, you would
Yeah.
probably get different, so yes, in that case you would.
So did you put in the top gray section because the two brains section and the background image
I have a question.
did or would you go separate?
What would you call it?
I would make them.
Like,
Okay,
The reason I would do
from
that.
a, like,
that and then separate.
Or tag, or just the
That would
code.
be the piece right over here. This would be
That's what I would do.
Okay. Just because the
maybe
background
like a
image.
call out.
Yeah, well, the background, yeah,
So-
exactly, the background image, right, you want it to just be in the container.
Right.
But also, like, the thing above it is, like, clearly a block of code, it's
Right.
taking up its whole width, and we don't wanna complicate that.
That would be a,
Yeah.
Got
It's just easy to leave it like that.
Okay, cool.
Cool.
Thanks.
but like semantically, I mean, like tag wise,
Yeah, I don't think there's really like a clear winner there.
Okay. See.
Do those show up?
Yeah, maybe really.
Which class are we in? Seven?
This is 7, yeah.
Yeah. I think this is a 9.
It's mostly from the, general assembly. Yeah, most of it is, some of it is. No, so, I mean, GA has it, but not.
Did you say?
Joseph has given a lot of programs.
Yeah.
Design, project management, so we would make a lot of help. So.
No. No, it's got a percentage of I see what you're saying. That's what I was thinking. I think it's about, yeah.
I would make that
Yeah, of course. So go back to if you hit the forward button, or you just hit the wrong button. Yes, you click on this. I'll show you. Okay, so you're working on it inside of the class repository. What we'd really like to do is just copy this. You copy this, starter code folder, and then move it into, you should have one of your names. And then in here, yeah, that's okay. Okay, if you do come in, so actually get one of these to help you, of course, you know, don't fall behind.
I didn't even realize.
Yeah, so we're supposed to copy it from the class repository into here. And, you know, this, I'm just gonna make a folder in here. That's like class 7. So if you go to class 7, you can get rid of the rest of them if you want.
So.
And then inside there, so now go inside starter code, and now just drag that folder. Start This is where we want.
I see people go both ways with it. I typically don't. I'll usually just write it in like sentence case or whatever, and then just use CSS.
If you do file new there, it's just gonna put it wherever you last.
Okay.
Exit
Yeah,
out.
I just
If you right click on the top folder,
That's just.
no, and you do file, then when you save it, it's gonna be locked.
That's all. Thanks.
So, would you say that?
See, now it's in the right place.
So,
Call index slash first file project.
and then I was create.
Yeah, if you want to start doing that, you can. Well, the next thing you want to do is make a folder for your CSS, right? Yeah. Or you can wait until you start writing CSS to just start. Either way, I mean, you've already got started, so. Yeah. You should call it style CSS. Alright, so now you got the skeleton of your project. Cool. No problem. We haven't talked about that. Yeah, definitely not necessary.
So.
So you've got. Yeah. So you're thinking that as being, so this is higher. So that would be limited, that's something that I'm going to suggest. You may also.
Okay, so.
Try that.
So you've got a bunch of guys that all be.
Yeah.
Okay, so good question.
No.
You're gonna run into problems if you try to start putting things on top of each other. That's gonna be difficult. However, one thing that you can do is use the background image, CSS, in order to put a background image in a container and then put something inside of it. So you can't put something easily. You can't easily put something inside of it. Yeah, that's kind of wondering. I guess I'm wondering, do you have a body? Don't have anything. Just
Okay, so I was
So the thing you're considering is what are the common properties that you're assigning? For example, you have body.
right, because you know the problem has to be
Width, and then you got that body. If you see
the
that max
image is actually going all the way across.
So we call the div name,
but
and then just have this on top.
Yeah, this inside of it. It's not really on top, it's inside.
And then this whole thing goes.
It looks like everything's scanning the same way. Actually, like, I wouldn't concern myself too much with whether that's 100% of the browser or some max width. It just looks like all it has.
Just a quick note for people who are thinking ahead a little bit. You're going to run into some trouble if you try to make this an image tag. So what you're going to want to look at is something, a CSS property called background image. You're going to have to do a little bit of Googling to understand how that works.
For CSS.
For CSS, right. So we're not, because if you know, if we think of this as an image, then this has to be on top of that image, and that's going to be complicated. You don't want to do that. So instead, we want to use a background to put that image in.
And then
Woody County is 6 days. So backwards. Yeah.
For something like this,
So,
where there's no,
yeah,
what
what
would you,
would you
best practice for
sort
sort
of
of or have
make
to
all these items in this case, I would probably make, so if I develop there's nothing designed, obviously a lot more.
That's what I'm saying.
So, aside that,
Because
people
like
might be,
float,
you know,
or like there's nothing, it's not next to anything.
Otherwise,
Like you're saying, it's all the,
flat
all
lists,
these otherwise
they're
is
all
margin,
right,
right, which is
float them all.
respect the left. So why not just have it float right, because.
Yeah, you could
will run
float
into
them
some
right.
right.
Yeah, I mean, just common information difference. The interesting thing is, if you flip them right, then what you end up actually happening is the order of them actually will.
Let's get it away.
So we have
So what you do is.
Those are right.
Okay, and then this is the itself, does this go so rather than.
That is reset on its own? Like you copied reset?
Yeah.
Yeah, make it its own file.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, just so you know, like, hey, this is where reset was, and then this is all my actual, like, stuff. Right, yeah, you don't want that to be the same. Just so it's well. Right, okay, that makes sense. Or you can just not use reset and be like, you know, yellow.
What you can do is.
Bad practice.
yeah.
Another thing I want to point out as we start doing exercises like this is there are 100 ways to arrive at this. I mean, more than that. There's probably infinite ways to arrive at this solution. If Paul, Eric, and I all sat down at a computer, we would come up with 3 probably pretty different solutions to get here. Okay, so just because your solution is slightly different than your neighbors, or if you have a different idea than somebody else, that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. And that's going to be more and more true as we keep working on more and more complex topics. Is that weird? You were like,
I was like, oh, that's.
makes sense.
So if you, when you're going to show.
So you can maybe make this
Okay, so would you put that in? So I'm building, anything scary about there?
Not
That you think?
Not yet. I was looking at the HTML again.
Okay, so I'm using it as two headers.
Yeah.
It's rather than one block.
So.
But maybe that's not, because it's gonna be the same color, but you can still have it the same color. Do you think you would see a difference then when you split
But
it?
now.
Is that our idea?
No, I know.
But it's just that's all black and white.
I mean, when I'm looking at this, right, I'm drawing my box around both that and the map.
Yeah.
But doesn't necessarily have to be that.
Oh, well, that I have, all that sense, right? It's just.
So look at
that-
your close this header up there.
Oh, okay, that's not what it is. No, I didn't. Okay, yeah.
I mean, and that's not necessarily wrong. If you can make it work that way, that's okay.
But you could have it could be like the color could be, something could go awry with that, right?
No,
Yeah,
maybe. I mean,
exactly,
if you're
yeah.
using the same color, then, the eyes can tell the difference, right? So, as long as there's no border or margin between them, it's gonna look fine.
But then, what about using this as a header? For the second one?
I think semantically,
Something, like because to think about.
yeah, I mean, this will work. Definitely, that will work. Semantically, having two headers right on top of each other is kind of weird. But, for the purpose of this
What
exercise,
could you name it like a side?
you could call it a side. You could also, what is an H2, right? It's a block element itself.
Yes.
So you could just take it out of the header altogether. You give it a class so that it looks like that. I mean, that's one option.
It worked. So I guess with the CSS, where are you going to? How are you going to get the low and
Okay.
drawing where when things
Yeah.
are stacked on the top of the other?
Yeah, so if we do think of start matchmaker and then the nav being its two block elements, like they're both gonna take up their entire width, so that's fine. The problem is that those guys are on the right. Right, that's what it is, is that they're on the right. So we could do two things. We could either float those things right and stack them that way. Or we could put them in another box and give them some margin on the left.
Or we could use it as the second thing, or we could,
The second one, we
Yeah.
could float them right.
right,
Or we could put them in a box, right, and give them some margin on the left.
okay.
So if we draw a box, a block element around them and give it margin on the left, it's still gonna fill up its entire width.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
I mean, it's like infinite ways of doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of ways to skin a cat,
So then,
as they say.
so then with this, to make it different, I would want to do it. Because you're combining it now that it's like.
No, I like my HTML, right?
What's this top div?
So you group them all.
I mean, you could probably just group it each one in that, in the header.
So thoroughly confused or just?
I'm very.
Very.
Curly is also.
It's a little,
It might be very
little
confusing.
HTML stuff.
I do that.
Okay, so then that's right.
Yeah, not your idea.
Yeah, we need to get rid of
To
this.
this header.
Well, no, we don't need to get rid of it,
Well,
but
I
you
do
do need,
that.
it's a child of that header now, so you wanna sort of indent it. And you can also do multiple lines at a time, so you get that. And get those in that tab. And now you're missing the closing header tab.
A good reason it does that?
This
I
would
would say that's good, but it's everything is your shadow, like that.
Rules of indentation that are siblings should get the same indentation level. So this H2 is also a child of the body, exactly. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's just like you just never hold the semicolon. That's all.
One thing I'll say, this is getting a little bit ahead of myself, but you know, you probably don't want every H2 to look like that.
After background color black,
You know?
if it's separate.
So you probably want to keep that back.
That's it, yep, that would be it.
Yeah, inspect is your best friend.
Okay, and then this one, like this border around it, is that what would be like the overflow?
So you're saying there's like a slight bit of margin around the whole thing?
Yeah.
Well, let me take a look and see where it's coming from. 'Cause I think I know.
Yeah, so from the H1. Right, so then that would just be that overflow.
Exactly. Right. If that's what you wanted, the little, or are you referring to the little top bit?
The top bit and the sides.
I think that was a separate thing. I think I also know where that's coming from, but let's inspect. So is it within, so here's, is it within H1? Was it from H1? No, was it from the header though? Was it from the body?
Ah.
Check the body.
Well, I mean, think about what that
Well,
is.
actually, go back to your,
Well,
back to that and look
I mean,
at the-
this
where
is
it's
clearly
actually
different than this, right?
Yeah.
So what
User agent
semantically do you
stuff.
think this is?
Like a head.
Yeah, like a heading like 4 maybe,
Yeah.
or something of that nature.
Browser defaults. So Chrome
Ah.
automatically gives the body a mark.
Okay.
That's where I'm using a reset file with,
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very
Yep.
much. Thank you.
Sorry, I thought I saw you like.
That's okay, thank you.
Okay.
You guys doing okay?
So, because I was.
I think so. Can I get something?
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, and if you don't finish this, they will eat your brain. That is legally binding. Two two brains taste better than one.
The one that I've been putting aside is the one that I was. But anyways, yeah, if you Google it, you'll find it. And his is like the simplest, but that's not it. These are all different versions. This is an article about how there's so many different versions. This is not that. Actually, not that one. That one says that beauty. Scroll up now. Is it even this? Oh, oh, there it is. No, it's this one, but just change it.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the, you can call it,
Yeah, you call it whatever you want.
but usually call
For
it.
standard's sake. So, one thing I will. You, trying to see like what your vector structure is.
This is just moved out. So what I usually end up doing is I'll work and then I close it out. Fix it.
Okay,
Cover. So,
sure.
yeah. But so that's what it's doing, and that's just anything.
Gotcha. Using brackets, you,
Well, it's already there, and then I like that I can do, what's the inspect, it's like live for this. So it's just kind of one less step.
sure. No, that's fine. But anyways, like your style, you usually in some sort of CSS.
Oh, yeah.
Good question. You do ampersand, copy, semicolon.
That works.
And there's it's just semicolon. That's a regular. There you go. It's in there in purple.
Yeah.
What is that called when you use it?
I don't know. Yeah,
Just escape characters?
It could be, I guess.
Or just like.
I know there is probably a name for it. I think maybe special character.
I thought it was like escaping, like if you wanted to put like a less than or greater than in your HTML, right?
Yeah. I guess
That
that's
thinks you're opening a tag.
Yeah, true. How to make it look like this?
Yeah, the fonts and the colors.
Oh, good, yeah, so no. Yeah, it's kind of up to you
Oh, okay.
to figure it out. And like if the fonts aren't exactly right, that's not gonna be like a huge deal. But you know, find something that looks similar.
Okay.
Just a little sentence.
Do you know how to get rid of this box?
Hit this, click in and then hit escape.
Oh, no.
Oh,
you're gonna get
It's totally blank, I want to get to do multiple shots. Do I keep it, do I write class again, or keep it in?
You have it. It's separate classes.
You can use the
Space.
called sit.
Okay.
Yeah,
So in general, you can never have the same attributes.
Sit.
Sit.
So you can have a class.
It gives you like a little
attribute,
hover
class
thing that you can
class
click on any
attribute,
piece of like color on your screen. It
So you
tells you the.
Oh, cool.
Give one that's all.
Sit, right?
Yeah, so in the case of classes, you can give it multiple
You can slide that out.
added spaces.
Okay.
Sit. You want to pull the colors off of the page.
Specifically on a page or anything.
Anything on your screen.
No, no, after you use, existing HTML
For
file.
now.
So there are
Yep.
also,
You wanted it to be more like
so you can,
could you?
if you just Google like HTML5 elements, I found this, find something.
Could you possibly just do 6 list items and then just leave one blank so that it will space out an extra thing on the left?
Now, I also want to say,
You
like, people
could.
get hung up off that, it's a little cool, right?
But you could do that.
Yeah.
I mean, because when I did it,
And that's like, it's good to be as
Right.
accurate as you can, but it's not.
Right. Okay, so what I would do is
I just threw it in
rather
resources.
than
I forgot it was actually like a Mac store
You know, you
application,
could use
but
a div or use something or something like that.
still get it.
Okay.
Figure it out.
so
Nah, you can't. I mean, what more can I say?
and then you could do is take US. Yep. And you probably don't even need to specify a width here because the width is going to collapse to whatever the
automatically
content is. Okay. Yeah. So we always have to specify a width with the gray boxes because they didn't have any content in them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they would just collapse together. But now that these have text in them, they'll just collapse together.
That's,
Cool.
Thank you.
And then don't forget, so now that your UL is also being floated, so I don't know what you have containing the H1 and the.
yeah.
So we just have to.
Oh, yeah, so you already have a clear
So
on
then,
it, so.
so then I would go. So let's do is
You could put a clear fix if you float it. So I find that a
I'll
lot.
put a clear fish in everywhere else. Yeah, that's cool.
You may not have to, I mean, so if you did, no, that's the box 18. So you definitely need to have clear things on this guy because he has the UL that's being floated.
Oh, okay.
You probably could do it on here, it may not even need it, but it's not gonna hurt in this case because all of those guys are also being floated.
Okay.
So give that a shot, see if that comes up right. See? Oh, it looks there right here.
Awesome. And then we just need to please.
Yeah.
We should be able to test that out. Awesome. Thank you.
So we wouldn't really have any base style, what we were doing.
What do you mean by base styles, like the body and those kind of tags?
Yeah, like you would, you know, I think in the previous Even now, when you do orders and adding, would we want
Yeah.
to do
Should we go?
something like that?
Okay, so we can go, basically.
I mean, what you might wanna do at a minimum is copy in like your reset or normalized style sheet for that at the beginning.
Specify them.
Probably, wouldn't hurt.
Actually,
So include that, then include your baseline, then include your custom styles.
Yeah.
There's probably not much from like a base styling that you need to do here. You're probably just gonna want to like custom style everything anyway, so. Actually, you probably live without it. Yeah, it's probably not necessary.
Relative to where your CSS file is.
I mean, just as an example, what you could do though, is like, this is probably a button,
Right, so if you're
this is a
finishing
button, here's a button. So maybe just define all your button tags as like gray background, black text, that kind of thing, but, you know, something like that.
That's why people love Chrome.
Except for, this is also a button.
Oh, so what do you do about it?
That's like the classic case of like when you make a website and you're like, well, what if how are i7 people gonna use it as like complicated JavaScript?
Do you still support IE7 on anything you work on?
Facebook doesn't even support IE7.
Microsoft doesn't support IE7.
No.
They don't even support IE.
They have a website that's pushing people to get rid of IE7, their own product.
Although Android Pro, email is really hard also.
Android Chrome.
Like Apple's more subtle. They'll just like it'll just stop a little like they'll be like, yeah, just get a new one.
Yeah.
Microsoft like makes a website and like, come on.
Android or
I do have
I like everything. I don't think it's
email templates. So
I know how to make HTML.
So where's
Because that's like going through really cute.
which one?
Google. Yeah.
But when I inspect, I don't have
Scroll down.
to make it,
Go back to that page you're on.
play around.
Back to that
Table row.
Not support.
Graphs.
Yeah. So actually, the way to do that is apply for a line. Style for a line as yeah. So think about, so you have like your content, and as long as you're actually, why don't we take a look? Why don't you try this? Because that's like text decoration color is not split by. I actually once tried to use that word because I didn't know myself, and oh, I think this works. Yeah, because it's not supported.
Yeah, you can delete that for now. I mean, you'll probably want that normalized. So
I would not.
see if I can do that. For just the heck of it, try and put okay, look at your
Okay, so what happened? Inside. So.
then you can try again and your HTML. So notice you're getting 300, 300 and
Can you go back to your webpage? Inspect that. That's a great.
yeah, no problem.
So the title, the age is reserved specifically to be a child of that. It can't exist in the inside of their body. So the title tag is actually only what we use up here, which is actually what drives the text that you see in the tab up here. So this could be, well, actually, you can just omit it up here. You got an H2 here, so I would just.
Could I add more padding to the H2 class?
I don't know if you're gonna need the clear fix because I don't think anything would actually float up in there. You might want to set it. But yeah, you don't need to float it. You just run just
No, that's fine.
So,
Text. So I want to throw that paragraph.
I mean, it's getting there.
Yeah, exactly, right? So your original thing had like nothing, so yeah, nowhere to put that.
Yeah, I grab that. I would, right, because.
Yeah,
Remember,
slightly
you see two
text
things
decoration
next to each
colors.
other, that's like a row, right? So you want to like draw boxes on that.
Color underline, like no, sorry. Yeah, always gotta check Rob's support on the ones you're like, never heard of this before. You're like, hey,
Okay, so you have your three columns. So.
yeah, so already like is, that already is like a little hint, like, oh, there's some cross-craft stuff happening. It's like a hundred stuff. There's,
You just have a style section.
that's like columns. That's a really without it doesn't work. But for that, it does not work.
So the whole thing.
Just no, yeah, just, you gotta scroll down that page. It's like, yeah, you can, it exists, and you scroll down, it's like browse support. No,
Yeah, well,
no,
you
no.
know, this is a different way.
Yeah.
So, but.
There's,
let's
yes.
start this obviously. So you've got,
Think of other colored lines you could make.
you've got your header, and inside that header,
How
you
you
start matchmaker, it's right inside, next to that, basically under it, right, really is the nav view. And that, so that looks.
Okay.
That was pretty good. I will say
Yeah.
that close tag.
Pour yourself some content.
Yeah, I'm so.
It's not, well, it's contained, not like as an image tag, but as a background image.
You notice like when you select this one, it's a little underlined on top of it.
Like good crazy or like, oh, crazy.
So the next thing we need is that big box. Oh, actually, no, the next thing we need is because two brains. No, that's. So what kind of element takes up its full
This is my style.
Well, the header is one of these.
So here's what you should
As
do.
is the name.
Save every individual thing you have and close all those tabs and then reopen the tab. So like
So block
close
elements
that,
take up
so it's, I mean, it's saved. As
So
long as it has an X,
you
just
know,
save.
we can
Yeah.
put any block element underneath that, it's gonna take up that
So
whole.
close those. Where's the index file you want? You shouldn't have two.
I think it's this one.
You think it's that one? So let's look at the other one. Yeah, delete that.
Yeah, you do, and this would be fine, because remember it did.
Yeah, now here it is, index.
Also an H3, so
Okay.
just.
Now,
so
you
just take
have
it
two
out.
style.css files, which is the one you're using.
I have the same thing.
Okay.
So I think this is.
Do you? When do we use good things?
Can I see the other one?
Yeah, actually,
I think that was
Just right below.
That could be side.
Yeah, all the way to the last one.
What, what
Same
conditions
files.
make this?
So delete one of those. You should have two files that are the same. Yeah. Okay. And now, look at your index.
Has to be the
And now let's save it and open.
I'm a block element, and all of my children,
In your browser.
go. If I'm a block
Now
element,
let's
my children.
inspect and see if any CSS is
Then
loaded.
I need to clear.
Inspect the body.
So, is there anything floating in that piece though?
Let me check your
We
console.
don't need it.
You see on the top right, there's an error. Error file not found. So starter code CSS style, that's CSS. Can you go back?
Yes.
So you see why that
You
is?
have this sort of
Because
thing that you've got to get rid of this close to.
So it's. It's style, it's a.
Totally. Next, one thing I'll point out is.
Where's your index
You
file?
probably don't want every H3 to look like. There's gonna be some background color and other stuff going on. So you probably don't want every H3 like that. So you probably want to give that thing a class.
I think it's under starter. Can you close that little thing next to starter matchmaker?
Yeah, so what do you semantically think that
Yeah.
is?
So is it inside of starter matchmaker? It's not.
Yeah.
So what is, so what's the issue here? It can't find a file meaning that
be.
So I think your style.
Well, the issue is the relative path is wrong. filters. But I don't think that's the issue. So if index.html is in one folder, so what folders does it have to traverse to get to the styles?
Another box in here.
CSS.
So that box could be.
Not images, it has to go from starter code to start a matchmaker to CSS.
Yeah.
Is it doing that right now in your relative path?
No, just going to CSS.
Exactly. So the key, so the thing first is say, well, it's not find the file in my relative path and figure out what are the actual folders, what is the actual relative path it needs in this case. You figure out where the index file is, it's in starter mode, so it needs to go one more folder before CSS to get to CSS folder.
And then we've got another smaller box inside. And then a smaller box inside of that, which is the H2 or 3 or and then another.
To CSS and then to style.
So we need something
Yeah,
to wrap around this.
But spoiler,
So
you have
we can give it
an
that
extra slash next to start that you don't need yet.
So,
I think I
I mean, you could just use that main tag that's there already, so you could use that as the. Yes, that's it.
Yes, awesome, okay.
It's
So
probably
what do you
like
use to dock to the
because
slashes
eventually you're
versus
gonna
like
flip that.
Yeah, let's go back to your, let's go back to your folder structure. So let's say your index file was in images,
Play around with that.
Okay.
and you'd have to get back up out of images into start a matchmaker. So that's to go up one folder. So you go dot to get the start a matchmaker, then back to CSS. So dot is to go up. But since index is in your root folder pretty much here, you never need to go back. Because to go back from starter code, I don't even know what folder starter code is.
Okay, because.
Yeah.
I didn't know, because I didn't fix it.
You know, because index is starter.
Oh, okay, fine.
And actually, you wouldn't need it in startup either, because again, you're only going down through the tree. You're never going up.
Also that email PDF
Thank
as
you.
well.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was bad. This is like a passive aggressive, it's like, hey, sorry.
But did I? Yeah. Sorry. No worries. Hey, Jacob.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. I want to know, like, was that the floor? Was it the
I
foot?
am to the underline over here.
Uh-huh.
Also, like, feel free to just take a break. You know,
Check
you're ready to like start your break.
But not the text,
It's just
because all I'm getting
Take
is
a minute
that
if you want.
I should be doing
Or
text
don't.
decorations.
So.
Yeah, you're wired in.
This is a
That's why I always,
tricky.
like, social network.
Wired in,
Yeah.
like, I could do, like, I could grab R and like.
I've heard it's that at work
An
like once in a while.
It's not like class. I just have it here, but I can match H2 that's underlined.
I don't know, I will rant at least once a month as well, how that lost
Okay.
in speech from this.
On the right track, but
Yeah, who cares if it
you're not gonna ever be able to get the underline to be different.
It's like World War II, and I was just thinking about
So what other CSS method might we get the underline?
Yeah, real rough.
So I do H2 class. and underline.
He was too reluctant, hey, oh, I don't wanna be.
Well, where do we want the border specifically?
On R.
Yes, which is the inside. Yeah.
So then we should just do,
And then at the end of that, like finishes a speech. I mean, yes, speech terms are real thing. It's a speech about World War II, and everyone's like clapping, I'm like, wait, is this a happy ending now?
You won the war with that.
Yeah.
That was what won the war.
That won the war.
Yeah.
Yeah. Words.
the sword is gray.
I just layered this.
And then would that just work as it is, or would you have to do it?
Take a look at it.
Oh, yeah, okay, fine. Alright, and then would you do?
So you're using that U tag,
Yeah.
which by default has a text decoration because that's sort of what it means.
So then we just do like style none.
Yeah.
Okay.
So not style, but you do text decoration.
Okay.
So you have to override the default behavior of the U tag.
And the default is text decoration.
Underline.
Okay.
That's the default. We want to change that.
Boom.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
And
All right, so two things. One,
no, it's fine.
These guys are all over this.
Okay. Yeah.
So, with no elevations on this, you have to do it, floating it right.
Mhm.
And it would be, so it's this way, you're looking at like 75%.
Okay. Yeah,
I mean,
that works.
and then, so that's all you have to do with that, right?
Mhm.
So then it's with these are gonna be photos.
Okay, so interesting.
Okay.
When you float something right,
Mhm.
it reverses the order.
Okay.
So, but do they need to be floated right?
No, because they're within that.
Because they're within that.
Okay.
So it is there.
Makes sense. I think that's gonna. But that's not right, because it's got.
Yeah. So a couple things. One, they're not taking up the whole width. But
So versus out of this thing, so.
No,
syntax
and
for
that's
this
even
is-
question here.
yeah, let's talk about those first.
This is the.
Yeah. So
X.
if they're not taking up the whole width, something's telling me they are
So,
adding
by
up
putting
to.
0 means I'm not shifting it to the
Okay.
right. So like that would be like 2 pixels, it would be missing like I want the shadow to be like off to the side of the right. So this is the
Yeah,
Y
because they're
offset,
there's
so
5%,
positive
so they would
like
be like.
it's
Relative to
the
what?
white area, but negative 5 would be just 5 would be the shadow of the light.
And the answer you say,
This
I'll say no.
is the blur actually, so how
This is not.
it's a, like,
This is
so
for
actually like this.
I honestly just pick
the
one.
actual, like,
I go with like golden sun, she calls it. It's like a
And
song.
then.
Yeah.
This looks like it has like
I don't
5
know if
different
it's
colors.
close,
So
so
Right,
there
so
was
there's,
one.
yeah, this is actually a special problem.
This is.
I'm not gonna
This is where I.
Yeah,
So
okay. So
So
then,
you're right.
I'll look at it, and then, so now something like, so that, do you do something like, that's like the container where like the margins are there?
Okay, so remember, there are two ways to see it. There's one way if it's a block element, which is margin and
Only 3.
margin auto and
So
restricting
it goes
width.
to this thing, so why did I say?
There's another way to center text and
You were on the right idea when you said Z indexing, but just saying Z indexing is actually not going to do anything.
I don't remember.
So you want to create kind of, I guess, like
Yeah, you just
a wrapper around the
So
sort of
just
creative
create-
profile, sign developer, finder, designer columns.
Z indexing.
Okay, let's go back to your, web page itself.
And then you just do sections.
You've got those 3 things.
so that is going to,
So look at your
it's going
HTML.
to align center all of its children.
So scroll down to where those things are. Obviously,
Yeah,
So you've got
let's-
3
let's
sections.
inspect that.
Is actually.
Let's do that.
I wouldn't,
Inspect it in depth.
I guess you could, I wouldn't consider those really sections. I would probably just make them divs, but that, I don't know. Yeah, it's not really like a section of the site. Like, I wouldn't say like each panel is its own section, I'd say like the whole thing could be a section.
Here, so it's not just, so first one that is
So right now you have 3 section elements, which is totally fine, I mean, that's all structural standard, HTML5 stuff.
because we're flooding,
Yes,
it's
but,
not behaving like a
but
block
look,
element.
right now, you haven't wrapped
It doesn't
anything.
need to be.
It doesn't need to be like a shit up its own, so I could be doing the position. So
Yeah,
you
you
can
do.
play with that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
here,
You haven't wrapped it in a class clear.
No, actually, it's, you didn't. write
So,
Well, I mean.
have you applied any styling to those sections yet?
You wouldn't have to.
Probably not, that is how it's, so. Look,
Okay.
so
So, would I say?
click on the headers.
And then it's just gonna shift it over.
Like,
We won't, we should actually
Make it, make it highlighted, so you just.
but it's putting the.
Uh-huh.
Can
you go back to your,
I think I need to do.
Don't need to do it.
So you got your index HTML real quick.
Than anything else, but.
See?
So
So you got that red dot, or the, not red, gray dot. You have to save,
That's,
just hit command S.
Well, it's too much.
Collapsing margins.
Something's collapsing, I don't know what it is. We'll tap that, you need to scrap that now, see if your section properties are being applied to that, and if so, if not, we'll see one. Yeah, I'm not sure that.
So you just went over.
Yeah, you did
Well,
something.
yeah, I went over how to
That's
solve
not gonna
it
have any
if there's
effect. We'll see why that
side or
is.
something else. If it's just an H2 just has margin.
So can we just scroll down in your doc here, get to those sections.
Like make it a div.
Well, you could, or you could just give it, you could just change its margin.
They're inside that, you have to expand that clear first div, that little
Zero,
right,
yeah,
yeah.
just trying to get it through.
Let's take a look and see if any of that's static.
That's the one.
So just click on section,
Now remember,
click on that, and you'll see here.
got rid of.
It looks like it's not being applied.
We also got rid of it.
We would see it above the user. Any styling you apply from your own style sheets will always equal up to user agent style sheet, which is from the browser. So
Margin, zero.
let's take a look at your
It's gonna get rid of that space.
CSS again.
Because remember that space outside. Good. So, yeah,
So then,
You go
what
here.
was this again? I need to look up.
so tell me what you would say.
Okay.
And I will say, tell you what I said.
I'm sorry, just go up to the head. Okay. Yeah, it looks like you've got the right path for your CSS file.
The bullet.
That's not the issue.
Yeah, totally.
Your CSS file should
And
be
add in
loaded.
there CSS, right? So CSS, list, no bullets, something like that.
It's not insert a match.
Probably did the
CSS
exact
images go work in JPEG. It's insert a match or images go work in JPEG. Does that make sense?
So, do me a favor, go to line 72 of your CSS.
So.
So the next thing I would like test to say, is this target working? I just throw background
Also
right on.
stack
I want to say, it doesn't look like anything is happening with that part of this CSS like this. I just throw background right on. So I say, okay, I know this is working or I know it's not. I can't.
So how Stack Overflow works is somebody poses a
Yeah, it's not
question,
working.
and the best answer gets a green check.
So the
Why is
CSS is inside of
You would,
that.
so this would be.
Image is inside of that.
I see why.
So in order to go from
Wait,
inside of this folder.
And,
I won't
and
tell
just
you,
so you
but-
know, you can put that on the LI.
I'll give you a hint. If all of you've written the word section, you've created elements with the tag section, right?
Right, so would
So
you
in
just do something
CSS,
in here?
This is pretty much,
Hey, thank you.
this is pretty much the answer, but if the target isn't working beyond a certain point, so you notice that
Something with.
this stuff is working, right?
Okay, like a.
Right, then you put like a border, so in between that and the selector that isn't working, there's probably a typo, and not probably, there is.
Yeah.
Right.
Strong.
So what happens is it'll invalidate, it won't load any of the CSS having that typo, because it just can't read the file.
And span, you can do span and class, or you can just.
Yeah, you probably, if you're using span, you'll definitely want to include a class.
So here you would just put the span.
It should be just, should be the
I will say.
You didn't close your list item selector,
It looks like.
or your list item declaration, line 61 needs a closing
So let's
filter.
cross through.
Oh my god. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's fine.
So sweet.
Yes.
There.
And you're in business. Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, because you can't float sections, again, they're just block elements like divs. You're not gonna keep the background red. So now you know it's working, and you're on your way.
And then,
Class equals,
okay, it's a good.
you have to, you're missing equals.
Oh. Okay. I'm gonna try to figure out this.
Well, describe that.
We're striking it.
Yeah, so strike through to be fine.
Yeah, that's a common thing with debugging CSS is like, if it works up to a certain point, then it stops, there must be a typo.
Strike out.
Background very well. We're going.
Your what? Your button is transparent too.
So you're editing, you're going out of CSS. That's one
Like
step.
the whole thing
You're in,
is.
you're in CSS, you're going out of CSS, that's one step.
Oh, I thought it would be, would it not style CSS? So we should go up to.
So the dot dashes are just for
Passers, okay.
So then I'm going up to start.
Mhm.
Then to start matchmaker.
Mhm.
So these are his
Now,
two.
alright, sidetrack.
That looks right to me now. Now, I will say that your directory structure here is a bit odd. I would have CSS within the startup matchmaker, but you know, that's fine.
Right.
Don't mess with it.
Okay.
Okay, let's look.
That's,
So we have three little sections that.
So when you hover over that,
Obviously, I mean, like, so,
is that right?
Right.
So for scenarios.
Would it just
like
be,
that,
yeah, right, if I just do like.
I can see this, that is kind of actually have.
Forward slash, could I just do
Right.
like, start with code? Sure is.
In this your website, do you remember what talked about
yeah, I've never actually styled anything that had like, I was gonna try and record it, but,
So absolute.
yeah, I would look at basically like,
I guess it's
like opacity one, opacity one, something
So-
within, like, lower opacity.
Okay. Matchmaker. Just like.
I see the issue.
Yeah, don't ever use,
So,
don't use exclamation
You know what
points.
this is? It's at the same level as that images.
It's like how
This
you
is the-
override.
Within that
specificity
images,
and-
expand images.
Proper CSS syntax.
Alright.
You're like, I want to correct it, I'm just
Okay,
kidding.
well, so then I need co-working.
Yeah.
Okay. Alright, cool.
Yeah. Is this mine?
So the button
I'm
shouldn't be
leaving
see
this
through,
everywhere.
but the background is.
Oh.
That one stumped me.
Yeah.
So you want this to be opaque?
No, so, well,
Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
wait,
You got that.
well, I was just gonna say, so the background has like opacity 0.85.
Right.
The button should be independent of that.
Oh,
We just
okay.
talked about it.
So setting opacity, so you've got like a div or a something that wraps around this whole thing. When you set opacity,
Okay, so
that sets the opacity of
So-
it and everything inside of it. So that's not what you want. What you want to set is
So
the
you want this
background
H2
color
name?
opacity.
No, I don't.
Is that a
don't
whole
separate,
different
then
thing?
take it out.
Well, all right, so that isn't
Oh,
an
I do.
actual thing.
Okay.
What,
That's
do you remember
the-
like,
You're giving
rewind
the
to your
background. What is the
class, like,
Yeah, the background is just supposed to be on this, but
we talked about different ways that you can set color. So the most common way is the
Okay, so what's happening here? Okay.
FFCC, blah, blah, blah guy. But there's also RGBA.
Actually, let's go back to Chrome.
A stands for alpha, which is the opacity level. So Google that boy. and see what you can come up with.
So
yeah.
click there, okay. So click there. And now hover over the nav here. Go up one key. Yeah, okay, so look at that. You notice something about that?
There's nothing where it's pointing.
Yeah. So it's collapsed in on itself.
That I need to fix.
Yeah.
Oh, I should have put it there instead of there.
I don't think you saved this. Because it should work there.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, get in there.
get in there. One more question. Right, I'm just getting started with CSS. But how do I get them to scoot over?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways, right? One thing we could do is give their parent some margin to the left.
You guys got any questions?
So that'll parent of the unordered list,
The.
or the parent of the list?
Either one, actually. Doesn't matter, because they're both boxes.
Yeah.
So right now, it's just both filling the entire width, so we just gotta restrict the width of one.
This is not very,
There you go.
By even, I mean, it's like, you want it to be more than.
Yeah,
right?
More
it's
to just.
too large, you want
it's
to
just-
however.
And then also it should have maybe bottom margin and bottom, or it should have some.
Yeah.
Like, some space.
Yeah.
So,
This guy.
Okay.
Looks like the file's not found.
It would be okay, but like,
he
use percentages for
has
something
margin
that
on the top and the bottom by default.
I see, change that.
So, do, you could just zero that out for us.
So do that.
Margin. Zero. That's gonna collapse all that margin. If you wanted to have like some kind of like equal spacing kind of uniformly around all of this, then on the container, if you maybe added.
So it starts, right, so yeah, it starts from CSS, so you're in the CSS.
It's not great, but it's a super.
So you jump back up and dot dot.
I just wanted to see what it
Yeah, then you jump to start.
That's okay.
So that adds some padding, so now you still got this guy
Okay,
over
cool.
here who's
Good.
a little weird.
No problem. What can you do now, so it's
Right.
not the same one?
I can't find it. Okay. So, right, so these are
You start imagining her inside of it.
So the backwards.
You start at the bottom. It's actually just you start at
It has to be processed in. It did.
So, so he's gonna be on his own line.
It's just like,
Yes.
So there's actually no reason to need to plug him at all.
But if I.
Startup
The
is.
size of the background.
Yeah, he's kind of, the text is kind of to the left, but everything else is below him, like all this stuff. So there's no real need to do any sort of floating on him. He can just take up the whole width for you, which will automatically force this whole block to be on the line below it.
Okay,
So, yeah, so remove the floating there.
okay.
Then this one, you correctly did a closing, which is good.
So.
Now, you don't actually, so in the examples where we were doing with the gray boxes and I have anything like that, we had to explicitly set up width on all those because none of those boxes actually had any inside of them.
Oh, so it's longer.
Yeah.
I see. I was gonna
So
say,
when you look something,
that was
so because you have the content, you don't need to set an explicit width, it will just collapse to as wide as it needs to be. So all I did was I removed the width on him, and then I removed the width on all of these, and now they just tightened up. So now obviously like this section is
So yeah, like with the,
so what you can do then is just use like
that, you can always check your.
Because the border.
Yeah, so each one of these, put a little bit of margin on each one, like 10 pixels, and now they're nice and spaced out.
Right on.
Got it?
Thank you.
To be honest, I would do it the way you did it, because then if you decide to change them, you don't have to change the CSS. Yeah. Cool. That's great.
It cuts out, so we stick to that, so mess around with different background size. Stuff. So just kind of. Like the flow.
So. So good. Cool. Yeah, again, just like any element, you want to target two different, ones that have the same, they're the same element tag, and just throw a class on them. Yeah, all right, cool. Good.
Yeah, but you got the base color down.
Any questions?
No, I'm good.
Let's go. Oh, the sort of, so,
Yeah.
I think like alternative audio.
well, can I see what's in your? Yeah, so that is missing some of.
Oh, okay.
So background size contains, can you go to?
Yeah.
So look up, I guess, background image.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll have.
So look at the
So
third
what's
part.
happening?
It's.
Oh, no, yeah, right.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's repeating, but I was gonna say that, I was gonna do it, that's why.
Yeah, so it's repeating.
It's, you know, if this is, it's matching it to this height, and then, you know, you project it, and that's,
I believe, yeah, it's got a
repeat that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I need to figure that out.
Yeah. You're onto something.
So it's not repeating, I'm in your seat.
We,
It can't work on that one class.
I'm probably gonna do the because there's stuff.
So again, it's not repeating now.
So now, Heather, now she's.
This is what.
Question?
Yeah.
Obviously wrong, but
Does this look like it's
what am I doing wrong in terms of imaging?
Okay, so see where
Why
your
is that?
style sheet is.
It looks as though, I mean, it looks as though the container it's in.
So do I
Has,
need to
like,
go
some
back
set height,
out of this from?
Because this is in the CSS.
And my guess is,
Alright, so let's do that.
what's in here?
Well, it's not from me. So from the file, it's reading.
Yes.
It's reading the
So pretty much that article,
Yeah,
if you
find the
that
background
article parent element, it's kind of be set by that thing on the right. Like, the other thing is just a background image. So the height of that is, I mean, you could also set the height of the parent, but I would just, looks like that thing gets longer and yeah, more.
All right?
You've got a little issue with your,
How's it going?
interesting.
Oh.
Go away, alright, actually.
Sorry. I'm so embarrassed.
Yeah.
That's something.
Alright, I'm back.
Here you go.
Please don't.
Why?
Because I'm so annoying.
What do you wanna?
I'm gonna wait another 10 minutes or so. At least. So just fair warning, we're probably going to wrap up this activity in like 10 to 15 minutes. If you're panicking that you're not going to finish in time, don't. You can come to office hours and we can work on it together, and or the solution will be posted sometime after the class. So if you still have a lot to do, that's okay. Just try to chug away at it. Yeah. Okay.
Alright, actually, it's just Slack.
Yeah, so, we can see that the image is there.
Right.
It just looks like the thing that's containing it, the background, where's the background? So it's on the,
Yeah.
so to me, what it looks like is like the main glass. I'm guessing that aside in the button picture. And then we have flavor children with glasses. But not flavor, well, it should be. Okay. And honestly, button should probably be in that, so. Right, this is the aside. So that's one step, but if that name is lost, then how do you fix that? This one there. Yeah, that's, although you haven't really defined it. So normally just.
Yeah.
Command A, Command A, Command C, Command B.
Strong.
Yeah, without that sort of like blue kind of like sublime,
Yeah,
like, you've done this
yeah.
right, it's probably off. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it looks like, so see right after your class declaration, is that a property or a value? Well, what do you first, so you see right after your class name, your selector, what do you always say? Colon and then, or not colon.
So that's what I'm doing.
You need, so that background image is the class. Does background image the class?
I'm just gonna open the image.
You see what the shots are, you know, have you got that last name or background image? Can't see much of it right as your class. Right. Or as your selected, excuse me, just like a section or container. So background image itself is a CSS property. You actually need that to be part of the declaration for some select.
Oh, so here, back from.
So if you want,
That's not, that's not.
Yeah.
That itself should be, perhaps you want to assign the background to the div itself, so you should do background.
so, yeah, no, if you want to keep working on it, please do, yeah, absolutely. All for it.
Okay, so.
What I'm saying is you want to assign it in class. Right, and select it in your CSS using analyze. So I think the piece of code you have in the CSS is good, it just doesn't have a select.
So,
Right, so give it a class, you use the class, and use it as the select, and I think that finding that stuff.
73%
something that's really.
You're fine. I'm blushing. Shake it off. Rub some dirt on it.
So that big box.
That's like
Yeah.
You don't have to give it a two sides.
So you basically will have like some div with a background image, and you can float something right within that. Yeah. You can also float and assign margin. So if you go, so see how it floats but doesn't go all the way to the right, all the way to the top or the bottom? Yeah, margin. Yeah. So you can put like margin around floats as well. Because we've been using a lot of like 100%, right, which wouldn't have margin, obviously, because margin is, goes over even if width only covers content, adding order.
So you know this
So margin
vector
goes over.
range that's it always.
Oh,
So
yeah, let's look up text decoration color. You're the third person to ask about this. Scroll down. Ooh, not supported. Yes, that's why it doesn't work. Nothing brings you greater joy than telling someone, oh, that doesn't work. No, not my fault. So yeah, there's another way to achieve a colored underline. Think about this. You have content. How can I get a line underneath content? Well, think of the box model. What's the one thing that gives a line? And then if you want the underline to be thicker, you can use, pixels. You have options for decoration like dash and all that.
Because it's just one word.
So you can target any word using using span example, right? So you can target that span itself. And remember, the span only goes with the width of the content. So the border that you put in it also will go with the content. So you'd be good to go. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you don't want that. Yeah.
Zero, zero.
Yeah, you gotta wrap it in something.
Alpha.
So in other words, you want that whole thing to do something. Like, it's not wrapped anything, it's simply just existing as H2 and P on its own right now, so you have to wrap it in its own, like, wrapper element, like a div, and float that, yeah. Otherwise, you can't float those things without CSS knowing, like, this is what you want to float. There's no way to target those two elements as one thing.
I would also Google CSS RGBA here where they
Narrow.
Okay, so what's happening?
As long as, I mean, the point of this is to work within 100% of whatever you
That's good. When you see something weird like that, it's almost always going to be some of your floats are not being controlled.
Right.
Clear fix that. Almost always.
You can do that.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah. So we're just working on like floats.
is this wrapped in a P tag?
So what do we know about P tags?
Should throw some Google fonts in there. Maybe a marquee tag.
So what kind of just kind of
Look at marquee tag.
yeah.
They've been like somewhat deprecated in HTML5 because they want
Unless
they're so terrible. Where's an example? Come on, MBA, give me an example.
Cool.
Good.
Thank you.
It's so terrible. Content scrolling across the page. Oh, you can also do like marquee, one that is like just weird, like diamond direction ordering. On this page. Yeah, you can do behavior alternate. Now just scroll like. It's hilarious. It's like the worst. It is the worst.
Yeah.
There also used to be a link tag that was
What is
like,
that?
Like it would just go with
It's great.
the amount of text.
If you're developing a
That's not a
scroll
big
on your webpage.
You have to specify specific pixel width on the border.
It's the same, any time you're using scroll layout on your
You're
webpage.
gonna have to play with it.
Trigger.
Unfortunately, there's really
So
no
border bottom is not.
Oh, sorry.
Border bottom is, so border bottom is the shorthand if you only want the border on the bottom. So you know how we usually do border 2 pixels solid yellow?
Yeah.
In this case, we do border bottom 2 pixels solid yellow, and we all in one line.
Okay.
So I was saying she could add marquee tags.
Oh, I mean, that's, I just finish off every.
No, they're terrible.
And you always use a space.
Life is just one big marquee tag.
You need to put, you know, the width that's
And here. Two.
however many
Okay,
pixels you
before we
want.
worry about.
And then you can just get rid of this.
Let's like sort out the rest of your.
You're earning your.
Sweet.
Throwing.
Now, one thing I want to point out for you about your side. You want to be consistent with our class names, okay? And so here, you're using lowercase and dashes to separate words. Here, you're not using any dashes between words, like separate. And here, you're using capital letters, okay? So you want to be consistent, you want to standardize.
Okay, one
So-
question. So
You
how
don't
am I gonna
so
get,
if
can
you
we do it on the
float something left or right.
Okay.
What are you trying to achieve?
Well, it just,
Yeah, I was
When
see how it's, like I used to add a
So,
category before, but then when I put it in.
Yeah, it's right
there.
This is just.
So I didn't think
That picture doesn't start at the same spot. Is there a way to align it?
But yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
It's like-
so wait, we're actually start at the same.
So I mean, like, on that, is there a way to like align images?
That's Because it looks like
Because there's just an order.
And that's what a lot of stuff is.
it's like longer, right? Is that what you're saying? Like, see more of the image,
Yeah.
so you guys can body. That just has to do with like the width of your browser.
Right.
Yeah. So the image itself, so having since it's like spanning the whole width, because you've got like, you know, cover and no repeat. It's saying like, okay, I'm just gonna display it up until I have more.
Better yet.
Right.
With that layout, so it has like, again, like a longer side and it's more narrow for the
So my question is there a way to shift this image up so they can see?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Look up like, look up, it's like, image rock.
And so it basically like ends up saying, okay, so if you were to take for a pen.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are we trying to split this? What are we trying to
Yeah,
take
look at that, yeah, you can do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's just like what happened, I guess.
What did they? So first of all, we probably want to close the lead after this. Well, if we do that, then what are we gonna put back?
Yeah, because, so think about it, like, it's got,
That's not gonna work.
I think it's got X amount of room to display.
So if I wanna close that,
Like, I would assume.
and then the next step is you're gonna wanna take those things that are in that box.
I didn't
and wanna close it.
Or excuse me, the height. Yeah, so it runs up all those pixels, right?
Well, no, I was just wondering if there was a way to make it work by stretching the condition instead of zooming the condition, or if one was better than the other.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I would
you've got a
just-
stray closed header.
So that was the
I'm not sure if that
If you were
should be there, yeah.
the best practice.
So the main's fine, so you just got rid of that. closed header. Ah, okay, so that probably looks like the
Like, so-
profile probably looks
So when
like
I
inside.
do that, see how it
It's closely
zooms,
aligned.
as it gets bigger.
It's not zooming, it's just revealing more of the image.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So because proportionally now the width is, allows you to display like more of the height of the text portion, that's all. Yeah, because again, so the height is set,
That's basically
so
it.
that like the height is 400,
This
the width is
is
like
now
800, you know, you see less, but then as you tighten the ratio,
And
it's more
also,
for the actual
if you
ratio of the image.
the creative profile could cause you like something.
Yeah.
We gotta wrap up.
We're on the right track.
Yeah.
Okay. I know everybody's hard at work and we're making a lot of progress, which is awesome. If you haven't finished, don't stop here. Try to finish it if you can. Come to office hours, schedule a hangout, something, so that you can make sure you understand all the concepts here, okay? I will post a solution, if not tomorrow, maybe the next day, just because I want to give people time to work on it if they choose. And then you can refer to that if you need to. Okay. I just want to introduce this concept. We're going to talk about this more in a few weeks from now when we get into like responsive web pages. Okay, but I just want to introduce it because this lab and the layout challenge introduced a set of problems that have been solved. Okay, so one thing you may have noticed is you're writing float and width X percentage over and over again throughout your style sheets, right? We're floating this left, we're giving it a width, we're floating this left, we're giving that a width, and we're doing that all over our style sheet, which is not, ideal, right? So we have this notion of a grid, and I even have been using sort of the vernacular of a grid when I talk about layouts, right? Rows and columns. Well, this is something that's commonly implemented in CSS. So if we're looking at something like this layout, okay? What we can do is we can turn this into rows and columns by drawing some lines, okay? And these are the lines that we typically draw, 12 columns, and then rows, where we need them, right? So we've taken this layout and we've divided it into columns and rows. Does everybody see that? Why do you think we choose 12 columns?
Because you can kind of combine columns to create different thicknesses if you want to play on more or less columns. Yeah,
exactly. So we can create boxes of different widths by combining columns, right? And the reason we use the number 12 is because it divides evenly by 2. It gives us 6, right? Divides evenly by 3, gives us 4. Divides evenly by 4, gives us 3, right? So it's it's a nice number that allows us to have different size boxes and different numbered rows, okay? So there are a lot of implementations of a grid out there. This one you've probably heard of or may have heard of, called Bootstrap. And this is probably the most popular CSS framework that's out there. It was originally developed by Twitter and was later open source and is now sort of the de facto CSS framework. And I'm not going to get into the specifics of any of these, but in general, how a CSS framework works is they just define a bunch of classes that you can use in your project. So for a lot of these layout problems, rather than writing your own styles in your style.css, you can use a framework's predefined classes to make your things lay out in this way. Okay, so here's sort of what that might look like, right? If we're using one of these frameworks, it may have defined a class called row, and then it may have defined classes called column 6, which means take up half of the row, and column 6, which means take up the other half of the row, right? And so then this is all we would need to do that middle thing here. So if we're looking at this is all we would need for this. We wouldn't have to write a line of CSS ourselves. Yeah.
So you like define column 6, but do you still get a float left to?
No, that's all handled in the framework. So you can imagine if you looked into Bootstrap's code, the column 6 might be defined as float left with 50%. Okay, so we're going to come back to this, but I just wanted to introduce, there's a lot of pain in writing all of these widths manually, right, and doing all of that. there's a better way, but we're not going to get into it yet. I just wanted you to know that there's a better future on the horizon. Okay. Okay. A couple more things before we go. Assignment 4 for this Sunday is up. The link is on the class repository, but I'll go ahead and paste it in general just so you have it. It's going to be, basically the same process as the previous assignments. You're going to come in here. You're going to fork the repository. You're going to clone it down to your GitHub desktop app, work on it, commit, push it back up, and then submit a pull request to the repository. Okay, and if you have trouble with that, do reach out to myself or one of the TAs, and we can sort of walk you through that process. But it's going to be the way we do every homework from here on out. And this assignment is basically very similar to what we did in lab today. You've just got this mock-up, and we're just going to turn it into a web page. The assignment, though, does give you the design specifications, as well as like some boilerplate code here. So it's a little more than we got for the lab today, but still, it's going to be mostly building this on your own. Okay? Any questions about that? All right. Okay, so if you could fill out this exit ticket, this is class 7. If one of the TAs could post that link, perfect. Yeah, and then let us how you felt about today's class. This one was a little bit different than previous classes, so as always, your feedback is super important. And then once you've done that, you can continue working for a bit, and I'll hang out, or you're free to take off if that's what you'd like to do. Paul posted this in Slack, but just out loud, he's going to adjust his office hours from 6 to 8 to 5:30 to 7:30. So if you want to come tomorrow to continue working on this, he'll be here from 5:30 to 7:30. And I'll be here on Sunday as usual from 3 to 5. Bye, people on Hangouts.